Hey guys, welcome back.
Anybody have a melancholic child, or you're a teacher and you got melancholic students? It's the most prevalent temperament that's out there. Roughly 41% in some stats of the population leads with their melancholic temperament. What are some do's and don'ts to really influence them well? That's what we're going to be discussing here today.
Yeah, we're going to be sharing a lot of our own personal stories because our only child is predominantly melancholic. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll see you guys in there.
Hey guys, welcome back.
Hey, welcome back to the Catholic Coaching Podcast. My name is Matt.
And I'm Erin.
And we are the Ingolds, and we are your Catholic coaches for the day. We're continuing on with our parenting series using our temperaments, and it's the do's and don'ts of parenting today, a melancholic child.
Yes. We have firsthand experience with this. Our daughter is primarily melancholic, secondarily phlegmatic, both of the introverted types of temperaments. But we also have some free resources for you all to help you on this journey. Is it connected to the
Yeah, so it's all connected here. So you can download our free temperaments quick guide now for parenting. So parenting in your temperaments, and that will come along with it a little printable temperaments test that you can take on behalf of your kids. Maybe your kids aren't old enough to really go through the test themselves, but it's really helpful to actually go through this for your kids so you can understand what their kids' temperaments are, what your kids' temperaments are, and then how do you approach differently to get the greatest impact, greatest influence in forming your kid.
And we're on the third episode of this series. So if you have a choleric or sanguine child, go back and listen to the other ones. But welcome. We're excited to share with you even our story of our own little sweet melancholic Avila.
And this is also super helpful for teachers here as well. So anybody that's responsible for forming young kids is great. When we had the parents over at our house from our school, we did an event, Parenting in Your Temperament. A lot of the parents are like, gosh, I wish all the teachers were here as well, because they know their kids are going to their schools and they like the comfort of knowing that their parents have a personalized approach to their kids. And they're honoring their unique design and their unique habits, and they're equipped to really form their kids when they're at school here as well. So,
and our friend Mary, who is actually a kindergarten teacher over at the school that our daughter's at, she actually went through our coach training, and she has used a lot of this work with temperaments with the children, just like even in the way that she interacts with them, the way that she understands them. It's so helpful because the kids are in the rawest form of their temperaments. Like a lot of people are like, can you figure out what your kid is when they're a baby? I'm like, actually probably more so than as an adult, because they haven't really learned some type of coping mechanisms. They haven't learned ways to change.
Haven't refined, right? Their temperaments are still very apparent and sharp and unrefined at this moment. In fact, I'm glad you brought up Mary, because she shared a story. Maybe we've shared it on the podcast before, but I really like this. And I think it's a good lead into what we're going to be talking about here today, because this was her in her classroom, her kindergarten class, dealing with a deeply introverted child that was there and just was not contributing, was not really responding, was very quiet and clammed up whenever she was called on. And so Mary, in her wisdom, just recognizing, okay, I'm probably dealing with a really melancholic child. And Mary had the secondary, she's sanguine melancholic. So she's really good at getting these kids engaged, but she also has that melancholic part of her that really could identify with this little girl. And so what she did, knowing that it's still part of being an excellent student to contribute, and she didn't want to just give this person a free pass to not be engaged because she was just introverted, she pulled her to the side just really gently at some point while the other kids were doing something else, and she just sat down with her and had kind of a face-to-face, heart-to-heart, and she just said to her, you know, it can be really hard to speak in front of the group, can it? So like the first thing she did, she just saw this child and she just identified with, yeah, it can be kind of tough. And this little girl kind of looked at her and she said, she just nodded back. And she goes, yeah, it can be hard, but it's also part of being a really good student to kind of get engaged and to answer questions and to raise your hand and things like that. So how about we do this? I know it can be kind of hard feeling like you're just on the spot when I call on you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play a little game with this. Whenever I call on this person over here, know that I'm going to call on you next. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when I call on this person, Susie over here, know that you're on deck. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked her. So you're just going to have a little bit more time to prepare. How does that sound? And this little girl kind of smiled mm-hmm. back at her and was like, okay. And that was the way that she started to get her involved. And it was really honoring the unique design that showed itself in her melancholic temperament.
Yeah. Especially with the shy little ones, the melancholic and the phlegmatics, they're a little bit harder to figure out. It took us mm-hmm. a while to figure out Avila, and we were like very attuned to it, but because she was more of the introverted, they're not so extroverted in their mannerisms. So it's a little bit harder to figure out.
Yeah. A lot of the temperament expresses itself interiorly.
Yes.
Right. Like, and then you get glimpses of how that thing
Yes.
is
So you can
exterior.
figure out, okay, they're definitely introverted, but I'm not sure which one they lead with.
Yes.
And that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So the format here.
Yes. All right.
The format that we have for the podcast. You want me to take this? You got it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we're going to start with the values because again, when kids are acting out, they're doing it seeking something that they value, and our temperaments tend to incline us to value certain things as a higher priority than others. Okay. So we're going to explore what the melancholic child values. From there, understanding what they want, we can get attuned to how we react.
Well, no, it's how they act, how they actually are triggered by not having the thing that they value or the thing that they value is threatened.
Yes.
But then we react to that. So
Yes. And I'm reacting right now to being corrected here on the spot. My choleric melancholic is like, all right. But I know how to deal with that because I'm an adult. And anyways, I love you. And also from there, we're going to move into, what do we got here? The do's and don'ts. The do's and don'ts, right? And oftentimes we just react ourselves when we see our kids reacting, and that just creates a big reaction cycle. So by the end of this, you'll have some strategies to approach, you and engage the melancholic child in a way that really motivates them and neutralizes them and gets them the thing that they value without all the acting out.
Yes.
Cool.
Great. Let's do it.
All right.
Dive right in. Okay. So melancholics value authenticity, meaning they value truth, depth, and genuine connection. This is good for you to know as a parent, especially when we're talking about the do's. How are we showing up with them? So that's one thing. The other thing is excellence and perfection. They strive for high standards in everything that they do. Sometimes it's achievable, sometimes it isn't. But that is what they are always moving towards. They value loyalty, and which means they're deeply committed to relationships and principles. So they might be the person later on in life, if you have somebody in your family who always sends you a card and is always thinking, just very thoughtful, probably a melancholic, just because they really value these committed relationships, especially if they're close with you. Number 4, reflection. They cherish time for introspection and understanding.
Need lots of quiet time.
Yep. Yep. And probably more as a child. I'm not saying you lose that value, but maybe you've figured out ways to kind of work around it when you're older. And then finally, justice. They value fairness and a sense of moral responsibility.
Very principled.
Yes, very principled.
The authenticity, you brought up the depth, the genuine connection. This is something I realized even with our daughter, Avila. I don't need to raise my voice, right? It's sometimes this is a look, and maybe you guys have melancholic children in the same way where you don't necessarily need to use a lot of threats or punishment. It's just the disconnection that they feel when they've acted out and there's a rupture in the relationship is an intense punishment for them. All right. And so that sometimes even just giving a look is enough to kind of give the reinforcement that is needed to start to correct the behavior there. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So how do we find these triggering circumstances? I said this before. It's when, and obviously this is not an exhaustive list of their values, but this is the core values that you'll see show up. But it's when their values are threatened or maybe aren't present.
They're not being met, or they're perceived that they're not being met.
Or they're perceived that it's not being met. Yeah. So the triggering circumstance for Avila, we'll give you guys a little story. She will be drawing a picture It's really whenever she's doing something new, but we'll just use that as an example. So she'll be drawing a picture and then she'll go, "Argh!" and just like throw the paper or the pens. I mean, that's a little dramatic. She doesn't always do that, but she'll just be like,
she has, yes.
We'll know if she's very frustrated.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
That's what we hear. Yes.
Right. Yes. Or if she's doing anything that she's not excellent or perfect at yet, she gets very frustrated. She's 6 years old. But really what's being challenged or what's being threatened is that perfection, that excellence,
that ideal image that they have in their mind that they're really yearning for, and just the mourning of I'm not there yet.
Yes. Yeah. So in these circumstances, in the past, I would be like, what is it? I'd be like exasperated. And we'll get into that later in some other podcast where we're talking about our responses to our children and our thoughts about our children from our temperaments. But being sanguine phlegmatic, where I like move on pretty quickly and I'm a little bit more flexible by nature, I'm like, why is this such a big deal? That's what I'm thinking in my mind. So now I know, okay, to not do that, to at least maybe make that internal until I work on it on myself. But other things to not do in this situation when their values are threatened in some way, or it's a perceived threatening of their values, is don't rush them. This is going to trigger them even more. Pushing them to move too quickly can cause anxiety. You can even rush them out of their emotion. Right? Rush them. I mean, a lot of times like rush them to mass or rush them to school, which I feel like you do every morning, but, it's still like, don't rush them, and especially don't rush them out of their emotions. That's
huge. That's really huge. And that doesn't change, by the way, when you're an adult.
No.
There's something that's a great gift that I think the melancholics give in the way that they feel their emotions, their deep passions, even sadness for a long time. And they really give us an opportunity, maybe if you're not kind of leaning that way, to just love them in that place where they feel perhaps unlovable. That's a great gift. That's a great experience to invite, that we can get invited into if we have those melancholic children.
Yes. So don't rush them. Also, don't overwhelm them. So avoid overwhelming situations, too many activities, too many social situations. Rapid changes can stress them out like throughout the day, because it does take them a little bit more time. There's that reflective nature. It takes them a little more time to adjust to things, and it's exhausting. Whenever Avila is over at her cousin's house, she's got 8 cousins here and they all live under one roof. Nobody's in college yet. And Shannon actually has a couple melancholics too. And we kind of we laugh about this, but, I'll be like, where's Avila? And she'll be like in a room by herself. She's had enough, she's had her fill.
With her cousin Max.
With her cousin, yeah.
Who's
Max
also had enough.
Max is another melancholic. But or maybe they're in 2 separate rooms, but still they're away from everybody else, all the activity. So, I'll just find her kind of by herself. And even we've experienced this when we've had too many activities throughout the day, because you can go and go and go, and I'm like done after. I'm like, we need to let her, because she'll melt down if she doesn't have a break.
I need it too. It's just like when you're a primary extroverted, but you also have that introverted secondary temperament. And I've talked to a priest friend of mine that's primary sanguine, and secondary melancholic. He's like, I have to really be intentional of making space for that introverted part of me, because that extroverted is so dominant. It can often just drag that introverted part of me along.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily give it what it needs. And so yes, being intentional as extroverts to create, even though there might be some resistance up front. Even with Avila, it's like, no, I don't want to leave my cousin. She really enjoys her time. But we know that she needs to have some of that downtime.
Yes.
And to create some intentional space for it.
Yeah, that's really big.
Yeah. Avoiding the overwhelming them. This is also come in the form of peppering them with questions, especially if they're acting out. I've noticed that the melancholic child takes a little bit longer to process.
Yes.
Right. Very intense thinking. They want to make sure that when they speak, they've chosen their words well. They're giving you a well thought out answer. And so asking them a question and then giving them space to really think through it and maybe even leaving and coming back saying, I'm going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk about this, but just giving them some space to internally process before you demand some sort of an answer, or perceive their lack of an immediate answer as they're not listening or they're not paying attention, they don't know, or something like that.
Yeah. Yes. That's good. That's a good point. Also, avoid dismissing their concerns, like take their worries seriously, or just like be empathetic about it. You know, like you don't even have to take it, because when they're young, it's like, okay, worries, like we can kind of over intellectualize. I mean, like that's not really anything to worry about, but just be with them in it. And say things like, hey, I know that, I can understand how this might worry you. That's it. I mean, you're not indulging it, but you're connecting with them in it, and you're not dismissing it. Later on, that's going to be like, I think, a great talent that they could bring to learn through their own working through it and finding some solutions. But you got to give them that option or that ability. Don't shut it down right out of the gate.
Yeah. We dealt with this last night. So like last night Aaron and I, we had to go speak over at the university, and we came back. My mom was babysitting my Avila over at her house, and we lived with my parents for about a year when we first moved here. And Avila had this queen size bed, you know, to herself. Well, my mom and dad sold the bed and they got a new bed.
Totally, and they're right.
It was they can totally do that. And so my mom's she's showing us a new room, and then at some point, it's at the end of the night, she was very tired too, and Avila just storms out, and it's not usually like her. And we get over to our golf cart, because that's the type of town we live in, and we climb in with her, and she's starting to cry. And Aaron, you were just like, what's going on? And what did she say?
She said, I'm going to miss that bed.
I'm going to miss that bed. And it was like a deep thing. And there's a part of me that's just like, it's a bed. It's not a big deal. But then I started to think to myself, you know what? Maybe
there's some core memories.
Maybe there's just something that's just more by the way that God has designed her and wired her. She just finds deeper meaning in these things than I do, where I can just attach a little bit more easily. It doesn't mean that she needs to be mourning the bed forever, but there is still some meaning there. And I think that it's good to hold the space for that, allow her to honor that, recognize also that she's tired, right? Yes. And we're not going to fix her emotion. And she woke up this morning and she was fine, right?
No word on the bed.
Yeah.
You know, so
we'll see how long it lasts. Yeah. She might still be thinking about it.
Well, that kind of goes into the last one. Don't invalidate their emotions. Yeah. Avoid saying things like, don't be so sensitive, which can make them feel misunderstood.
Or ashamed of their emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. I have heard her say, nobody understands me. And I'm like, okay. So that's my cue to be like, okay, what do you feel misunderstood about? Or just to leave the room, you know? That might be taken as invalidating the emotions. It might also be like, she's tired.
I'm going to give you some space to process this.
But you can say things like, I can understand why you might feel that way. She's always really appreciated when I say that. Like, I can get that. Like back when I was younger, you know, I experienced something similar. Obviously, we're not saying you're doing this all of the time, but like try it 10% more and see how they respond differently. It might actually help mitigate the meltdowns. So
yeah, there's been times where she's kind of been in a spiral too.
Yeah.
And it just kind of keeps going. And there is a point where it's just like, okay, I understand you're upset, but we're going to move on.
Yes.
And I think that's an important skill that we give, because yes, there's time to process, there's time to feel it. And there is a time to engage your will here and start to move forward, because it's starting to get to an indulgent place, which means it's not really fruitful here anymore. It's just like, I understand that you're sad. We're going to start moving forward here, or we're going to, take a minute. We're going to give ourselves 3 more minutes on this, and then we're going to start moving on to something else.
Yeah. Yep. You can put a timer on too.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do's. Here's what we should do. Create a secure space. This is like emotional space, just a home, but also offer emotional security and respect their sensitivity. Just create a space for it. Like Matt's saying, like, we don't automatically go in, okay, you have 3 minutes to feel this emotion. Like we kind of give her some of that experience. Okay. Yeah. What does this feel like? What is,
help her process through it.
One thing that she responds really well to is, hey, what color is the emotion? Where do you feel it in your body? Like, just kind of like, they're a little bit more grounding questions, but also her mind is not going now on the thing that she's upset about, but it's actually going to her own experience. And so it does kind of calm them down a little bit. Calm her down anyway.
Yeah. And literally, like, we teach adults how to do this sort of processing work here as well. And so even at 3 years old, we were starting to introduce some of that language. What color does it feel like? She doesn't have the emotional vocabulary, but we start to introduce that here as well. Just naming the emotion can be so powerful. And here's the thing that I've noticed about melancholics. Sometimes all they need is just someone to be in the emotion with them, see them, affirm them in that place, and that's it. And then they start to they start to move out of that naturally. But the more you try to pull them out of it, the more they anchor themselves down. Because again, I think part of their mission is like, no, I want to invite you to manifest God's merciful love in me. And even just meeting me in my misery right now.
Yes.
We can be invited to be a conduit of Christ's merciful love to the melancholic that can rest in that miserable place, right? But still call us to love them while they're in that miserable place.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's what we used to do. I'll just break it down. I would say, oh, you feel like, do you feel disappointed? Just kind of start to give her the language. Or do you feel angry? And she'd be like, angry or whatever. And I'd be like, what color is it? And she's like, red. And I'm like, where is it? Like, where do you feel it in your body? Like, in my hands, my feet, and I'm like, okay, yeah. I remember when so now I'm starting to, empathize with that. I remember when I used to be angry and I used to do some other things, but like now, like, you're not doing that. That's actually that's great. Like, and just kind of saying like, okay, do you want to take a couple deep breaths?
Breath work is huge.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it's just really meeting them there. And yeah. And you can do this with your teenage. I mean, like Matt said, we do this with adults. So a lot of people just they don't have the emotional language. And I do think that this is such a genius of the melancholic person. But there's nobody there to help them develop that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there are people, but it's rare. I don't find it a lot.
Another do here is and maybe we're getting into this, is like that sometimes that secure space that you help them to create is literally like, I'm going to be in the room over here if you need me. But like, it's literally just giving them space where you're not engaging them. Because again, their interior life is there, but the relationship, while you're not necessarily talking to them, the relationship is still there to ground them.
Yes.
Right. And so they still feel that secure base. Like, this person's here as I'm needed. I'm not being abandoned, but you're just giving them space to kind of process.
Yep. Yeah.
A little silence goes a long way. What do we got next? What's another do?
Another do is encourage their creativity. Melancholics are creative, usually like very musical or artistic, or just think creatively. Provide outlets like art, writing, and music where they can express their deep thoughts and emotions. This is Avila. She loves it all day long. Like, we could just put a piece of paper in front of her and and I think this is actually another great way. When you were mentioning before, okay, it's time to move on, give them something else to do in that moment, especially when they're young. Like, hey, why don't you just draw a picture of blank? Like, you could even just draw a picture of like this emotion that you're feeling, like, what does it look like? If it was a character, what would it look like? She'd probably draw somebody from Inside Out, but it's still like, it's a way of expressing it. And then we can talk about it after, and you're kind of allowing for more space there. More ways to express themselves.
Yeah. And like, guys, sometimes it's simple as like, we know this as parents, like, just distract them. Just like, give them something else to focus on. It doesn't necessarily even have to be like a continuous processing exercise, like Aaron just said. And it's like, okay, how about we do something else? And it's a shifting focus. We've given them an opportunity to feel their emotion, to kind of understand it a little bit, to have somebody affirm them in that space. That experience is a tremendous education that's going to help them be more emotionally resilient as they get older. And then it's like, okay, and then we give them an experience of just moving on and not continuing to dwell and stew in it, because that can be a very miserable place. And if you start to just habituate that behavior as well.
I think it's also asking them to create something for somebody else. That's actually when you kind of pull a melancholic outside of themselves and like, hey, can you help me help this person? That's actually a great expression of their mercy, because they do bring that beautifully to others.
Yep.
Number 3, recognize their efforts, celebrate their attention to detail and accomplishments. That's pretty self-explanatory, you know? So recognize their efforts. Hey, yeah, you worked really hard on that. And even if maybe they're, you know, in that perfectionism spin, like, you'd be like, you worked so hard on that. What did you learn from that? What did you actually learn? How did you grow?
Yes. And I like to focus on the effort that they have versus the outcome, affirming the effort rather than the outcome. And I don't know where I picked this up, but I started doing this lest we start to make the association of, I get the good grade, then I get the affirmation. It's like, no, you work hard and you get the affirmation. And then the grade is just kind of maybe another way of keeping the score, but we're affirming the things that are really within their locus of control, and the things that they can choose to kind of, you know, I can work on, I can engage, I can do my homework, I can be diligent here. And that's really the positive affirmation association.
Yeah.
Yep.
And finally, we have teach them resilience, helping them reframe setbacks, kind of what we were just saying, as learning opportunities to avoid overthinking and self-criticism. Turn setbacks into lessons. This is really big. Melancholics love to learn. They're very intellectual. They've got big brains, full brains. They feel hard because they think hard, you know? And so really teaching them like, oh, what did we learn from this? Like, what is actually the lesson here? Like exactly what you're saying, but maybe a different touch on it, you know? Like, so if we were to go back to that situation of her going, I haven't gotten it yet. How could we reframe that situation? For me, how I've reframed it in the past has just been like, you know, art is not really like something you get graded on necessarily. It's just, the fun of it is learning how to do it and like getting better. Like that's the fun part of art, you know? And then one day you're drawing this beautiful lion, you know, whatever it is that she's trying to, and you're like, how did I get here? And it's just because you looked at it as the process being fun. And that was like just a reframe for her. And I remember her kind of returning back to that later on when she like kind of caught herself one time getting like frustrated about it. She's like, it's just for fun, Mom, right? It's just for fun. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like that's the best part.
That was, we got her this thing. It was like a tracing, or I think my mom got her this tracing set. And so she's been doing a lot of tracing, even like cartoons on TV. She's been putting the paper on the TV and like tracing some of the characters that she likes. And so she's been showing me all her traces, or tracing sketches. And I said, well, why don't you color those things in? She's just like, no, I don't really want to. I was like, I'm curious. Why don't you want to color it in? She's just like, because then you have to make all these decisions about what to color things and what color stuff. I like just using the pencil and just, it's like, wow, I'm going to file that away in terms of like just
decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue, right? It's
for 6-year-olds, I guess.
Right. Well, even like again, I remember learning this in my MIT class for neuroscience and leadership. When we are really engaging our cognitive faculties, we're really thinking hard, that actually burns more calories. So when we're kind of on average, we're typically going through like maybe 25% of our caloric intake is actually going into brain functioning. That's still quite a bit. But for those people that are really in a role where they have to do a lot of cognitive work, a lot of like think tank type of work, and they're really engaged up here in their minds, upwards of 30% of their daily caloric intake is now being dedicated to just the thinking. And so when you think of the melancholic versus the cleric is very much a doing person. The melancholic thinking is very active for them. It burns more calories, arguably, than the cleric doing. And so it's real work for them. And so, yes, sometimes deciding what color to color somebody's outfit can just be like, yeah, it's just a little bit too many calories for me.
Yeah. I love it. It's good to know.
Cool.
Like you don't feel like burning calories right now. I get it. You'd much rather go play and be off in La La Land and sing, you know, I love it when I watch her do that too. That's like my favorite thing.
We love our little melancholic.
Looking outside and she's just looking off into like, we're right on a lake here. And she's like,
she's just in her world. It's amazing. Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And we get to invite it into it. Folks, those are some of the do's and don'ts for parenting or teaching a melancholic child. So we hope we give you some good tips here. Again, this is great stuff that you can use for your own self-reflective work. Put that temperaments guide for parents to work for you and your spouse. Put it to work for you as an educator, if that's what you're doing. Download that free assessment that you can take on behalf of your kids. All right. So all that's right here in the show notes, or you can go to metanoiacatholic.com or catholiccoaching.com in our free resources section. You can find right in the top. That's where you can get these resources. But then we also invite you to come into our academy, because it's one thing to kind of intellectually learn about these things. It's another thing to put these things into practice and then bounce things off of another coach as needed. We're not meant to learn this stuff by ourselves. And we have some coaches in our academy that are actually like really good with working with parents. And some of them are even working with young kids here as well.
Yeah. So come on in, come see us. If you have any questions or want coaching.
And tune in next week as we wrap up with the phlegmatic child. All right. Bye. See you guys. Hey, thanks for sticking with us in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. If you like what you heard,
please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.